The grim sounds of war echoed around the once peaceful fields of the valley. The harsh clashing of metal on metal and bestial cries of rage reverberated off the wooded slopes of the valley sides, carrying with them the promise of death and suffering. Catelyn opened her eyes with a groan. Her eyelids felt as if lead weights were attached to them, and her head was pounding in time to the rhythm of violence. The ringing song of battle surrounded her, drowning out almost all thought. It was real then, she thought. It hadn't just been a terrible nightmare. Struggling up into a sitting position, wincing with every laboured movement, she took a deep breath and cried out in anguished rage. "Darren!" she shouted. Suddenly a truce was called, and the war paused. "What in the four hells are you doing?" Thoughtful silence, seemingly louder than the cacophony that had preceded it, reigned for several long seconds, almost as if someone was trying to work out if they were in trouble or not. "Nothing?" said a disembodied, hopeful voice. Catelyn sighed, contemplating just shutting her eyes and pretending it had all gone away. No, she needed to see what was going on. With a muttered curse, she pushed back the faded quilt of red and green patchwork. Trying to rub the tiredness from her eyes and get them to focus properly, she swung her legs off the bed and stood, swaying slightly. Around her, the bedroom was bathed in the muted glow of an early summer morning, the light coming through the dusty yellow curtains illuminating the equally dusty chest of drawers and the row of misshapen cuddly toys that sat atop it, and turning the white plaster of the walls a golden yellow. Had she not been up until the early hours of the morning tidying up the main lounge of the Dragon's Flight, the inn that was both her business and home, then Catelyn might have appreciated its aesthetic qualities a bit more. As it was, she was more interested in determining what exactly her younger brother was doing. Walking unsteadily over to the nearest window, she pulled the curtains aside, flinching at the unreasonably bright light, and pushed the window, already slightly ajar, open to its fullest extent. There was a wince-inducing creak of protest from the badly neglected hinges. A few flakes of white paint drifted away on the morning breeze, and a small spider scuttled out from the side of the window frame, paused briefly on the windowsill, appearing, at least to Catelyn's sleep-deprived mind, mildly affronted at the disturbance. Then it sped over the outside edge and abseiled away. Catelyn tore her attention away from the offended arachnid and looked down at Darren, her voice heavy with weariness and limited patience. "What are you doing?" she asked. The sun had not long cleared the top of the mountain range to the east. It couldn't have been later than 6 o'clock in the morning. Below, in the courtyard of the inn, stood her younger brother, Darren, 6'4" in height, barrel-chested, broad-shouldered, and with close-cropped brown hair, bright blue eyes, and an open, honest face that was almost permanently locked into an optimistic smile. He also currently had a saucepan on his head that was obscuring his eyes and squashing his ears. He pushed back the pan so he could look up at his sister and gestured vaguely with his mighty sword of justice, which did somewhat resemble the battered-looking poker from the fireplace in the inn's main bar. "I'm fighting the Dreadlord Corinthus. He wants to take over the world and make us all into the brain-dead slaves." Thinking privately that her brother was already halfway there at the very least, Catelyn looked down at his upturned, sheepishly grinning face, and then at the target of his righteous wrath, the Dreadlord himself. "It's a bucket on a fence post." "Well, yes, but I think it's infused with evil essences." He waved the poker threateningly at the bucket. It made no move to answer his accusations. Of evil essences there was very little evidence. "See?" Catelyn closed her eyes and rested her forehead on the windowsill. Unseen, the spider retreated further into a crack in the stone wall and considered moving home as a lock of hair dropped down to hang in front of it. "What are you doing, sis?" shouted up Darren. The saucepan slid down over his eyes again. "I'm counting to 10, was her muffled response. With a heavy sigh, she straightened up and opened her eyes. "Could you not have fought the bucket further away from the inn, or practiced more stealthy, quieter warfare? You know, sneaking up and taking it unawares type of thing. Silently." She wondered, without much hope, if the hint was getting through. Darren squared his shoulders, and took on what he hoped, slightly optimistically, was a noble expression. "That would be dishonourable. A warrior faces his enemy on the battlefield, looks him in the eye, and faces him face to face." Catelyn decided she was not yet awake enough to cope with the idea of honourable single combat against a dented bucket. "Did you at least feed the chickens and get some eggs?" "Yep," said Darren, nodding happily. The saucepan slid forwards once more, obscuring his eyes. "Oh, muttered Catelyn. "What?" "Nothing. Go and start getting the breakfast ready, and be generous with the portions. We're going to have to do some making up to the guests after their early morning alarm call." She turned away from the window and eyed her bed thoughtfully. Her large, soft mattress looked awfully inviting, almost as if it was beckoning her to come back to its warm embrace, and the quilt might as well have been crying for her return. You just had to look at it to see how much it missed her. It'd be at least an hour before the breakfasts were anywhere close to being done. Maybe she could have just a few more minutes. "Catelyn," said a plaintive voice floating in through the window behind her. "Cat, I think the pan's stuck."